This is Total Retail Tech Insights.
The content retail executives need to optimize their use of technology throughout their organizations.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Total Retail Tech Insights. I'm Joe Keenan, Editor-in-Chief of Total Retail. I am joined on today's episode by Seb Reeve, who is the Director of Market Strategy at Nuance Communications. We're going to be talking to Seb today about a recently released report from Nuance Communications, how retailers can leverage AI for superior digital CX, and some of the highlights and some of the valuable information that's included in that report, as well as just kind of an overview of the Nuance Communications business and how it can help retailers. So thanks for joining me on today's episode, Seb.
Hey, Joe, thanks for having me.
So as I noted, I want to talk a little bit to start about the recently released report that Nuance Communication has put out into the market in collaboration with Total Retail. Again, the title of that is How Retailers Can Leverage AI for Superior Digital CX. It takes a look at how technology and specifically artificial intelligence can be a real tool in creating trusted customer journeys through connected experiences, automation, and human touch, with a specific look at kind of the full purchase experience from discovery all the way through to post-purchase support. So it also includes some best practices for AI-enabled CX, and as well talks a little bit about creating secure shopping experiences, specifically with the use of automation and artificial intelligence. So general overview there around the report. Just curious and interested in getting your thoughts, Seb, in terms of some of the highlights that were contained in the report and what you think might be interesting for our audience.
Yeah, it's a good question, Joe. I think for your audience, there's been a huge shift, of course, in consumer expectations in the last 18 months, especially for consumers now wanting digital first experiences, when they're dealing with retailers. So, from our perspective, we wanted to share how, I guess, the trifecta of conversational, personal, and, as you mentioned, secure experiences can help the retailers out there in your audience to tap into those new expectations to drive increased loyalty, revenue, and obviously figure out how digital is going to work with physical stores and deliver, efficiency and cost savings and all of those things as well. So I think that's really what the report's all about.
And just getting into the fact of why such a resource is important at the moment, obviously there's been a huge shift in the retail landscape. It's kind of been trending in this direction, but obviously accelerated by the pandemic and becoming much more of a digital first landscape in many regards. Tell us a little bit about kind of why Nuance, invested in such a resource and putting that out into the market, and the general emphasis on digital and how your organization can help there.
Yeah, as you say, I mean, there's nothing new about the fact that consumers have been shifting to digital for a long time. It's just the pace in the last 18 months. I think that's moved things along. So I keep reading that we've shifted in digital adoption or usage 3 to 5 years in the last 18 months. And certainly, if you kind of look at some of the stats out there, online sales are up 39-40% compared with last year. And retailers, what we're hearing is retailers are feeling the pressure in terms of how to both understand that the pace of change and the demands that are coming towards them. But also, it's in the light of the fact that they're also trading in very difficult circumstances and have been for a while, both from the pandemic pressure perspective, but also with the increased competition of over-the-top players like Amazon, for example, right? So Amazon now opening stores, getting into apparel and grocery and all sorts of other things, which wasn't their stock in trade before. Interestingly, though, across the market, e-commerce is still only about 14-15% of the US retail market. So at Nuance, we focus on understanding those customer needs first, helping our customers, retailers, understand those customer needs, so you can start to transform, your retail, your digital and physical experience together. Try and figure out how to get the best of both as the path forward for the most consumers out there. And we wanted to convey sort of how not only those experiences, but our technologies, our innovation can kind of help fuel those expectations and those experiences that consumers want today, right? So let's figure out how to get them what they want online or smooth the path to the store. And as I mentioned earlier, really from a retail perspective, drive business upsides, real revenue improvements or efficiency gains are what most retailers are looking for whilst they're navigating these murky waters of the new consumer expectations.
And we're going to get into the consumer expectations in a second. I just have a quick follow-up on that last point, Seb, in terms of, you mentioned it, it's integration between the two channels, online and offline, digital being the connection point in a lot of cases. And the report delves into this too. It's not just the transaction, it's not just the commerce activity, but it's all these other digital interaction points that consumers are having with retailers and brands, from customer service to their questions, their interactions, they're looking up information, product information. Tell us a little bit about that in terms of the digital interaction that you're seeing, and why it's so important to have an optimized experience for the customer, as you noted, across both channels as well.
Yeah, I think the journey is the key word there, Joe. It's not just, as you say, at the point of transaction or post-sale support, but all the way through to the beginning of the journey of the consumer with the brand. In the end, I think what's still true and is probably increasing over time, certainly if you look at sort of younger segments, is customers want a connection with the brands that serve them, right? So they really want to get sort of an easy experience with those brands that kind of actually connects to what they're looking for. And I think personalization, for example, is a really important part to play across the entire journey. Obviously, at the start of the journey, you don't know a lot about consumers that you're doing business with, but context is still incredibly important. Getting to know the people who are starting to, at that point, discover your products and services on your website, or actually walking into your store, and using that data throughout the journey to try and sort of fulfill the most frictionless experience with those consumers. So I think that sort of it's really about sort of using every point on the journey to help the next point on the journey, as far as the consumer is concerned, but also as far as the brand's concerned as well.
So you mentioned the convenience factor, obviously critical in that customer journey. The consumer is first and foremost at this point looking for something that's convenient for them. But you also mentioned another critical point in terms of personalization. Can you talk a little bit about customers' expectations around the level of personalization throughout that purchase journey, as you said, including post-purchase? Tell us a little bit about your thoughts there.
Well, I think, firstly, a lot of the stats out there really support the fact that a majority of consumers expect brands to give them more personalized experiences. I mean, I think, to be honest, though, it's not really necessarily about the personalization per se, but it's that sort of the fact that personalized experiences tend to be easier for consumers, right? It sort of lowers the bar of friction. I mean, I always kind of think of the analog of having a conversation with a family member or your best friend, right? There's a lot of things you don't need to talk about because you share a huge amount of context together, right? So for me, it's about that ease of conversation, that ease of kind of working with a brand that can come from having that high touch of context sitting behind every interaction, right? So friction, I think, is at the heart of it. So it's a really important sort of brand stay focused on that from my perspective. But as I said, it's really also about ensuring that we're not then asking irrelevant questions throughout the journey. So as you mentioned, post purchase, we know what you bought. We know exactly kind of how long ago and when that purchase was made. But too many brands actually still have a disconnect. So when a consumer calls in, we're still asking questions like, "Hey, what can I help you with?" Right? Yeah. Which given the fact that I bought maybe an electrical good 5 days ago, there's a good chance there's an issue with that if I'm calling you 5 days after a purchase. So that degree of personalization, that's not getting down to the "I know you, Joe," but just from a perspective of just looking at the history of your purchase, I can see and probably then intuit what it is you're calling about. So that's it at its simplest. Obviously, retail is not the same. There's a lot of different kind of branches of retail, though, in terms of how this works. So we work also with very different kinds of environments. For example, with the large telecom carriers who are operating obviously retail at significant scale as well, but that's a high repeat business, right? So people are renewing contracts with them, a very cyclical user journey. So a lot of the data you use can really help you. When someone's contract's about to expire, that they're probably going to want a new phone at that point, and Therefore, there's a lot of information you can bring to bear to start to drive down, the friction in the experience, and hopefully drive up the conversion for users, and stop the losses in terms of people leaving you. So that's really how we see it, right? It's about using data at the right points in the journey.
Yeah, using that data to create that engagement and ultimately to help drive loyalty, which is the end goal for all retailers. Let's talk a little bit, Seb, about how technology factors into this. Obviously, massive amounts of customer data that's being captured by retailers and brands across all of their customers. Tell us a little bit how technology, artificial intelligence being at the forefront here, can help retailers and brands to meet these already high customer expectations. And the argument can be made that these expectations are even risen over the last year plus. It's particularly when it comes to the digital experience. So talk a little bit about that in terms of how artificial intelligence can really be a useful tool there.
Yeah, well, without getting into the technology too deeply, but more importantly, sort of how it's used. I mean, I think it's good to think about where in the journey these kinds of technologies can add value. And I usually think sort of, let's put it really simply, before sale, right? So customers in discovery mode in some way, shape, or form. Lots of technologies there. I think first and foremost, one that's deployed very widely today, things like targeting. So that's kind of really about looking for behaviors on your digital estate. So for example, customers been on a web page for a while, or has gone around the same page 2 or 3 times looking at products and doesn't seem sure of themselves in behavioral terms. There are algorithms that can be brought to bear there, which can proactively reach out to that user, and that can be just a nudge, right? We provide you a little bit of content that might help you understand what it is you're looking for, or maybe a little helper, or all the way through to a conversational experience with a chatbot, or even with a sales agent, right? So and that kind of a nudge at the right point in the journey can just help a user from disappearing off your website, right? So those sorts of algorithms are taking a lot of the behavioral data from the channel, right, from, in this case, the website, and figuring out who to target and how to try and maximize that conversion and minimize having unnecessary interactions, right? You're trying not to sort of talk to people too much. So machine learning algorithms, AI as you put it, are really good for that, because they can kind of be optimized over time based on feedback, right? So how many conversations ended in a sale, and what were the behaviors that led to that conversation, and let's train the algorithm to look for that. So targeting is a great way of kind of pushing the right experience to the right users at the right time to maximize conversion, for example. Mm-hmm. At point of sale, things like chatbots and intelligent assistants actually, put to really good use there. So, obviously people so-called cart abandonments really a lot of the time is just not having the right information or reassurance at that point in the process, at transact point. So providing answers to questions about payment options or what your returns policy is, for example, at exactly the right point can just help with that loss, right? So obviously we don't necessarily want to use live chat or expensive personnel resources at that point. So we're commonly using intelligent assistants to do things like that, which they're really good for. And then post-sale, when to follow up, algorithms that can be looking at, how long after buying that electrical good I mentioned earlier on, how long should we send a follow-up, and proactively, rather than waiting for you to call us and say it's broken, why don't we, reach out to the consumer at the right time with the right experience to say, hey, is everything all right with that? Joe, are you happy with the, with the new phone you bought or whatever it is, and allow them not to just sort of receive a notification, but have the two-way conversation if necessary from there with a lot of context. So, during the whole journey, there are lots of things you can do, using technology, but just really ensuring you're putting the right experience to the right user at the right time, to deliver pretty measurable results in terms of, as I mentioned.
Yeah, conversion, and obviously a cost savings tool too as well. And to your point, using information to be proactive in creating that engagement, not waiting until the customer comes to you potentially with the problem, but you have this information, use it to your advantage, and kind of delight your customers that you're coming to them, you're addressing issues potentially before they arise.
Well, notifications are great for that, right? Because you have all the context in that, right? If someone calls or contacts you, you have to go back through the whole let's ID you and figure out who you are or get your order number or whatever else it is. But if I contact you, that context's inbuilt, right? So that's a that's a much better experience from a consumer because you're skipping all those steps of who are you. So that's really where I think notifications and proactive communications, really can help a huge amount.
Yeah, it's a great point. So we've talked a lot about kind of personalized shopping experiences. That's obviously covered in the report as well, and something that Nuance is able to facilitate. But the other piece of the report and another part of Nuance Communications business is security and biometrics. So let's talk a little bit about that in terms of how biometrics and behavioral data can be used to create those secure shopping experiences the consumers are frankly taking for granted now. Like, they're not going to do business with a company if they don't feel that their data and the transaction is going to be secure. So tell us a little bit about what Nuance is doing in that area as well.
Well, yeah, I sort of talked about people wanting a brand connection earlier on as well. And I think a huge facet to that is trust, right? People want to do business with brands they trust, and trusting to look after your data, for example, is a piece of this as well. But, also trusting that, you're going to protect me from fraud if I give you my card details or whatever else. And, the mechanisms we've all been using for decades now to try and sort of secure online transactions have tended to use pins and passwords, right? So, and pins and passwords, let's face it, they were never designed to be used at the kind of sort of mass market scale. They were designed to sort of, secure a Unix system, computer system, right, 30 years ago, right? So the reality is they're generally not that secure. They create a huge amount of friction. And because of that, they open the door for a lot of fraud as well, right? We're all using the same password and we're writing them down and, making them as simple as we possibly can, despite the best efforts of organizations to make us change them and use alphanumerics and symbols and all of the other things they make us do, right? But that's all friction. So we're really about changing the equation there between, how secure something can be and how much effort there has to be to get into it, right? And that's really what technologies like biometrics are really all about. So rather than having to remember things and write them down and do all the other things I just mentioned, it's just really based on you, right? So we could be using different kinds of biometrics. Voice biometrics are used on certain channels to great effect. The banks are all using those actually now. My voice is my password, right? So that's the characteristics of your voice. So I don't need to remember any particular passphrase. I just need to give you a sample of my voice saying a phrase, and I can authenticate that way. So not having to remember things, fantastic. That's much easier. But as you mentioned, behavioral as well, there are degrees of security, right? We can also look at things like, how do you use your device? So actually behavioral biometrics, how I swipe my smartphone or how I use the mouse and keyboard on my laptop actually are identifying, right? Joe, you don't use your mouse and keyboard the same way I, Seb, do. Now you might not want to secure your life savings that way, but to get to the history of your last transaction, for example, or get access to support post sale, could be perfectly enough to secure that kind of interaction. So there's lots of different ways now to maximize or just provide access from a security perspective, but without all the kind of jumping through hoops from the consumer perspective, right? So that's really our approach and the way we try and look at it. So it's very design led. But of course, if you then really need to secure something, like I'm going to take a significant payment from you or whatever it might be, then we could still fall back to kind of a more secure mechanism as an extreme as well, right? So the flip side to that, however, is really looking at fraud, right? The thing a password doesn't tell you is that it doesn't tell you anything about who's using it. So if it's Joe writing the password, or if it's someone trying to pretend they're Joe using the password, we don't know. Whereas a voice print actually doesn't work that way, right? I can tell it's you, Joe. I can tell it's your voice print, but I can also look in a watch list and see if that voice print belongs to a bad actor, right? Someone we already know before has been trying to sort of extort money or claim an ID that's not theirs. So that's where it gets really interesting, because one thing that has happened in the last 18 months during the pandemic, unfortunately, is fraud has gone through the roof. And most retailers are feeling pretty keenly lots of new kinds of fraud coming into their business that they haven't seen in the past. So So that's really a big part of our business, is helping organizations understand and start to identify these new kind of methods of fraud and fraudsters coming into their business.
Yeah, certainly true in terms of the growth in fraud, as more and more transactions have gone digital, and retailers and organizations looking to mitigate that. The important part, and I think you talked about this well, Seb, is kind of striking that right balance. Is obviously you want to secure transaction and be preventing fraud, and passwords at this point are not the best answer there. But also not creating these, making, as you said, the consumer jumps through so many hoops and making this overly stringent process where they're just going to give up before they get to the end game and into putting in the payment information. So striking that balance where between the two is really critical.
Indeed.
So just kind of thinking and looking ahead a little bit, what in your mind should retailers be thinking about as they look to take action upon creating these personalized, secure, and the other word, convenient and quick customer experiences? What advice might you have, or what should there be at top of mind for retailers to be thinking about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we talked a little bit about technology earlier on, and my advice is don't start with that, right? It's I'm working for a technology company. It might seem a little jarring for me to say that, but in the end, it's really got to be about what the customer's getting out of it first, right? So really being as data driven about that behavior side, what customers are actually looking for, what they're asking for, and using that sort of outside in lens to drive the decision making on how to progress. Right. I think, when you start with the technology, you're really looking from the inside out quite a lot of the time. So it's that outside in data driven approach, I think, is really, really critical. If you're going to build a chatbot or an intelligent assistant, the right place to start is, well, what are people going to ask? Right. What is it they're going to say? So there are ways to kind of, get an experience out to market where you get what customers are going to type or say to you. Like, for example, you could look at your, ask your chat team. So, they're chatting to customers on text all day long, right? So that's great data to go figure out, well, what are the top 25 things that people are asking for, and how many of those can we go and automate, right? Or try to. And so that data-driven approach, I think, is really critical, particularly with machine learning or AI technologies. They're all trained on data, so it's really important that you sort of go find that first. And so that's really looking, from a data perspective. Then second to that, again, don't go straight to technology. It's design sort of, next, right? So thinking about, well, how should that manifest itself to the user? On what channel we're going to try and sort of solve this problem? How is that journey how is that going to be working within the consistency of the journey we're putting out there? So really through that journey design, that experience design lens, then start to think about sort of who am I going to partner with, and the technology side, right? So I think it's in that order. I see that the leading organizations are really adept at figuring out, how to do things in the right way to sort of make sure that they're using that sort of data and design to drive the bus and figure out, rather than investing in technologies that frankly don't work then and don't deliver results, right? So, and then just in terms of approach, try and deliver value as early as possible, right? So it's not about solving all of the CX challenges you have in one go, right? It's figuring out what the atomic, the small changes sometimes that can actually make a pretty big impact. As I mentioned earlier on, right? If you answer the right kind of 10, 12, 15 questions at the point of cart abandonment, you can actually save yourself a huge amount of loss in terms of revenue at that point in the journey. So I don't need to solve 27 other problems. Start with that one and then work out from there. So iterate from that sort of early value. And that tends to do a couple of things, right? It sort of gets your teams, feeling positive about the fact that they're delivering something, but also from the management of your business, you start to get the buy-in, right? You start to get the budget based on that buy-in to do more, which in many organizations is the hard part, right? It's not an easy process to get money. If you can show results first, you can generally find a quicker path to the checkbook. So that deliver value early and iterate, and based on just specifics, from our perspective, as I mentioned earlier, messaging and chatbot is a great place to start for retailers. We're all out there on sort of digital, launching a chat service and then starting to use the data from that chat service to automate a little bit, and then more of that demand is a great place to start and deliver value. So that's kind of where we see the majority of the organizations we're working with, begin. But then, of course, they're expanding hugely from there now. So, we've got a major fashion brand we're working with at the moment, global fashion brand, who are, have gone from, having an automated and live assisted chat capability on their website, but they've expanded that now into Google Maps. So if you're searching for a store, you can click a button and get a pre-store kind of conversation right there, right? So do I need to wear a mask? Can I try things on? Is the product in stock before I even get out of Google Maps? I've already figured out, whether I want to still go to the store or not and where it is. So that's pretty cool. I mean, and I think that's where the sort of digital and physical experiences start to merge a lot as well. So pretty exciting, I think. But yeah, start small, get value, and iterate from there, I think is the leave behind from me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So that's just a super comprehensive answer there, and you provided a lot of great insights and examples even to how retailers can go to that next step as they look to optimize CX. Another recommendation for our audience would be in that process of looking to optimize CX is to check out the latest report from Nuance Communications. Again, that's how retailers can take advantage of AI for superior digital CX. Seb, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about where they can find that report and how they can access it?
Sure thing. So hopefully it's a little difficult to do in audio. I'd prefer to send you a link, but in audio, it's nuance.com/retail-resource-hub. And there you'll find a ton of resources as well as the report you mentioned. So go check that out. There's some great videos and things as well. And then actually, if you like what you're seeing, there's a contact us button. You can hit that. You can get in touch, and we'd love to chat to you.
Great. And I'll just one footnote onto Seb's answer. You can also, as he noted, there will be a link in the show notes. So obviously you're listening to the audio for our podcast, but in that show notes, we will have a direct link to access the report as well. So I want to take the opportunity to thank Seb Reeve, Director of Market Strategy at Nuance Communications, for joining us on today's episode of Total Retail Tech Insights. Thank you, Seb.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Thanks for listening. For more information on this podcast, please check out our podcast channel page at mytotalretail.com/podcasts for show notes. Tech Insights is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few moments to rate and review this podcast. Thanks, and until next time, this has been Total Retail Tech Insights.